Hello everybody, welcome to another installment of Mythic Monday, where we'll take a look at last week's healer meta and dungeon difficulty for Fortified, Spiteful, Grievous Thundering, and look ahead to Tyrannical, Sanguine, Explosive Thundering next week. Also, our special topic for the week is going to be Respecting Trash. More on that in a second. Let's get started. Let's start with the healer meta and look at sub-creation to see what specs performed well last week. So if there's any doubt, guys, the healer meta is established. Resto Druid and Preservation Evoker are number 1 and 2 week in and week out, as they bring incredible amount of throughput, cooldowns, damage, and utility needed to keep your group up in Dragonflight Season 1. We're also starting to see them separate themselves from the pack with a whole empty tier between them and the next level of Paladin in 3rd and Holy Priest in 4th. This order is week in, week out occurrence at this point, and as is the fact that Resto Shaman, followed by Mistweaver Monk and Disc Priest, continually bring up the rear. I don't think this is a great representation of Disc Priest, as Priest players have clearly mostly migrated to the Holy spec for dungeons, but it definitely does go to show that Shaman and Monks are not timing keys at the highest level at a good rate right now. Honestly, as much as I have enjoyed Dragonflight so far and think it's been an excellent expansion, healer balance is a little disappointing to me. Now, it's not unusual for one healing spec to rise up ahead of everyone else. In fact, that's pretty much what always happens, and it's kind of nice to actually have 2 sitting at the top instead of just 1. But the case with the rest of the pack is that they're still capable of timing keys very, very close to the tip top, and I'm not sure we can say that that's true in Dragonflight. The disparity between the top and bottom is truly glaring. Thinking back to beta when the 40% health and 40% damage increase was introduced because healers were said to be having too easy of a time, I thought that change would be looked at more closely and adjusted a bit before the game went live, because it was clear that it made life extremely difficult for some specs. But from what I can tell, it never was, and it felt like kind of the death of some specs, particularly Mistweaver. Dungeon difficulty is also starting to become pretty static week over week. We know Shadowmoon and Court are the 2 easiest dungeons by a good amount. Post-nerf Algathar is giving groups considerably less trouble now that the ancient boss is no longer a wall. Knockhood and Jade Serpent are consistently coming in as middle-of-the-road difficulty dungeons, and Ruby Life Pools, Halls of Valor, and Azure Vault consistently being the bottom 3, with AV pretty much always the hardest. Given that we've seen a series of nerfs to Mythic Plus bosses over the past several weeks, the only remaining changes I'd like to see would actually be to the dungeon timers. The disparity between the amount of mistakes you're allowed in some dungeons versus others is really glaring. In Shadowmoon, Algathar, and Knockhood specifically, feels like there's a lot of wiggle room, and your key isn't necessarily bricked if there's some mistakes, or even after a full wipe depending on how it happens. In Halls of Valor or Azure Vault though, AV in particular, you have to play an almost mistake-free run to time the key. I'd really like to see these timers increase to put them more in line with the other dungeons. Aside from that, I don't feel like any dungeon is really unfair anymore, and some are going to be easier than others. That's just kind of how it always goes. I just prefer the dungeons to be more or less difficult based on the content and not the leniency of the timer. So next week we've got Tyrannical, Sanguine, Explosive, Thundering. At first I thought this was going to be a really good push week, but the more I've thought about it, I think it will present some real challenges. Sanguine can be a slog at times, especially in dungeons with mobs that have a lot of things that spend time casting and channeling abilities and trying to stay stationary, but the last time we saw Sanguine, it was in conjunction with Fortified. Sanguine Tyrannical is considerably less scary because mobs have less health. On the other hand, pulls tend to be bigger, so that might average out a little bit. Make sure to bring your knockbacks, and of course tanks need to keep mobs on the move to minimize the healing effects of Sanguine. This will be our first interaction with Explosive in Dragonflight dungeons on live this season. As a mostly healer audience, this is notable since tagging Explosive largely becomes a healer's responsibility in most groups. Usually Explosive isn't too bad, but for a couple of reasons I have some concerns this time around. First of all, with the increase in healing difficulty, we have considerably less free GCDs to tag Explosive with than usual. Secondly, we still don't know how Explosive will interact with certain bosses that have ads. Imagine Azurblade's Orb Phase with Explosives? No thank you. Melodrosa's Whelp Phase? Let's hope not. Lashers on the Ancient boss? Please no. Just thinking back to how annoying Explosive could be on a boss like Mistcaller and Shadowlands makes me worried for some of these Tyrannical bosses with ads. I guess we'll see how much Blizzard wants to make us feel the pain. Also, healers rejoice, no more Grievous for 6 weeks. So in most videos I like to throw in some random thought about my week of doing keys, and this week I want to talk about respecting trash on Fortified weeks. We joked about this a lot on stream this week, but I get the sense that a lot of players in Dragonflight Season 1 are pushing into key levels they maybe haven't experienced before. So here's the thing, on fortified weeks, trash is supposed to be the biggest obstacle in your timing of the key. Therefore, trash that has pretty deadly abilities should be treated with boss level attention to mechanics. Kicks, AoE stuns, knockbacks, disrupts, defensives, and immunities should really be used as closely to on cooldown as makes sense to stop anything that does a lot of damage. Throughout the week, I saw a lot of players seem to treat fortified trash the same way they'd treat tyrannical trash, and that's not really something you can do. I can't tell you how many avoidable deaths I saw this week on my various tunes due to big casts just not getting interrupted and stunned out. With the scaling in Dragonflight, this becomes necessary at a much earlier key level than we saw in Shadowlands. In SL, a lot of this stuff was still survivable by most people into about the 20 level, while I'd say in Dragonflight, insta-death starts to occur maybe 2 or 3 key levels lower than that. So even though we have a Tyrannical week coming up, it's still important to respect the damage that trash can do and use your whole kit to make stops on abilities that do a lot of damage. Alright, so that's going to do it for Mythic Monday, week 5 going into week 6. If you guys have any thoughts on the healer meta, the dungeon difficulty, the upcoming affixes, is explosive going to be as bad as I think it is, or am I overreacting? The idea of respecting trash on fortified week. Let me know in the comments section. I always appreciate it if you guys like the video. If you've made it this far, subscribe to see more of my content in the future, and you can also check me out on stream here on YouTube Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 9 p.m. Pacific. We do lots of keys, heal lots of stuff, have lots of fun. Love to see you there. Anyway, until next time, happy healing.